You need something to echo back to you. So
I think it's about live here. I think we're live. Let me just see here.
What if I don't want to be live?
All right, there we go. Hi, everybody. Hello. Let's see here. Why does it say YouTube tells me the bit rate's lower? It is not low. You're so full of crap. There we go. Just restream kicking up, I'm sure. All right. Hi, everybody. Hi. Can you hear us? Can you hear us? I remember, by the way, while I was doing the, oh, actually, before I go to that, I did that day that you mentioned on whether it was the live stream or on the show that I should set up betterpodcasting.com/live. I did set that up, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Just don't add a trailing slash. Only one. There's only enough room for one slash.
Just a slasher. Guess we'll have to shut down your OnlyFans account.
Well, hold on. It was working. I literally tested it today.
Haven't heard SP yet. Interesting.
What?
That's
How about
what Johnny's
now?
saying.
Can you hear him now?
Can you hear me now, Johnny? Can you hear me? Johnny. Johnny. Why
Okay,
are you ignoring me?
He says he can hear you now. Okay, maybe betterpodcasting.com/live isn't working, or I'm being blocked, which could be. I might have been blocked from my own website. I've had that happen before.
Yep. Love the DNS.
I feel like I should have got TikTok going so that
You have a TikTok account?
I should have tried to get it going. It would feel like I was doing something illegal. Couldn't resist.
Oh, Johnny says he's on YouTube. Congratulations. What's your channel?
Yeah, Johnny.
Yeah.
Johnny,
we want to see your show.
See your show. Check. Let's see. We're going to get a little playback going, I think. A little feedback. Let's see. There we go. I'll go to...
Good unknown time of the day to you, Ernesto. We're obviously in a holding pattern because Steven said we're in a holding pattern.
Something like that.
We're not going to go yet until he's ready.
I was just putting a couple posts out there. My Threads one, which made no sense. Hey there, Stargate Pioneer live at Gonna Geek. All right, that's good. That's all I gotta do. I think I'm good. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, apparently I'm live.
You are live. You are live.
Threads has said I'm live.
Has Canada already? No, we have not yet. Let me put it this way. My province, British Columbia, voted 4 years ago to abolish the time change. And contrary to the territory above me, also doing the same thing at the same time and going, we're going to make it happen. My province has said, we will wait until the westernmost states do something so that the truckers are aligned, basically, is the big line. But my point is that we like to act big and act big only.
So really small.
I just feel like because I got, an American co-host here, I would be feeling like I was doing something wrong by streaming to TikTok today. All right, let's just go.
Please.
I'm Chris Farrell from the...
Actually, hey, everybody, before I do go, if anything's sounding, because we got a couple different things going on, a couple changes on my side on the streaming. SP hasn't changed, his temporary setup right now for this week. Well, his Rodecaster Pro 2 is in. If something sounds really horrible, like one of us is clippy, the other's not, or like one of us super quiet, one of us super loud, let me know. I'll try to mess around with things on my side.
I'm Chris Farrell from the All Things Good and Nerdy podcast, a wacky weekend morning show, part of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're checking out right now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and the opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other awesome geeky shows over at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to episode 280.
Hold on. I just kicked my pedal. One sec. That's on me. That's on me. All right, go ahead.
Sure.
For now.
Okay. Welcome to episode 289 of Better Podcasting. On this show, we continue our podcast media host discussion talking about Simplecast.
I'm Chris Farrell.
But first, in this week's Better Podnerings, topics include a Spotify for Podcasters update. I had a secret multi-track test last week, and SP has a Rodecaster Pro 2 RMA update.
And finally, in this week's Better Podback, we hear that our guest, Chris Farrell from last week, was widely acclaimed as better than either of us.
Lauren, you're also better than either of us. Start the show now.
This is Better Podcasting. We are hobby podcasters through and through, just like you. That's why we are different. We minimize the money talk so that you can focus on building a better podcast.
Welcome to an all-new episode of Better Podcasting. I am Steven, and I am pleased to say professing his P4 love is SP.
I do like the P4, the Zoom PodTrack P4. I love it for a piece of gear for me when I'm on the road or not in my studio. It's a venerable backup, but I would prefer to use my main machine, which is a Rodecaster Pro 2, which is currently not in my studio. We will get to that later. Steven, we have to say a humongous thank you to our, can we call him a friend? Is that good? Do you think he would mind
asked that we don't call him a friend, I think, but you know, the feeling's not mutual, so we will say a friend.
Okay. So our friend Chris Farrell for coming on the show last week. It was great to hear his takes about some of the services that we had reviewed and his takes about podcasting in general. So if you want to have him back on the show again sometime, you're just going to have to flood his social media and say you need to be back on Better Podcasting.
I'd also like to point out that a special thanks is in order for him because since that's happened, we have had at least one person reach out to us to offer to discuss another media host service, which is something we mentioned at the very beginning of this season, which is if you are somebody who has a media host that you are passionate about, that you'd like to talk about, we would like to hear from you. And it was only after he did guest that came forward. So Chris, thanks for kicking it off. Greatly appreciate that. And you can always find us on our Discord at betterpodcasting.com/Discord or email podcast@betterpodcasting.com. You can do that, or maybe you could also send a note to SP while his Rodecaster Pro 2 is in the mail, maybe attach it to the one that's getting sent back to him.
We'll see. And also just a heads up, we're also communicating with at least one other person. You know who I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get in touch on a date. All right. We are going to just transition right into our Better Podderings segment. And we have a show for you. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is a little copyright battle. And we've been discussing this off and on for years. Is it important from a copyright standpoint to, you know, not call your show something that's already out there? There's been a ton of people that copy other people's titles. There have been a ton of people that have copied in company names, sports team names, that sort of thing. And does it matter? That's the question that comes back. Does it really matter? Well, Steven, I can affirmatively say yes, it does matter. And you know why?
Because you finally issued that lawsuit against me for making the official Stargate Pioneer podcast?
Yes, that was very bad of you. It is trademarked. You know that. Anyway, talking about trademarks, there has been a podcast titled Trademark Battle, and this is via Gordon Firemark. Now, Gordon Firemark is a wonderful legal resource for podcasters in the United States, at least. We here at Better Podcasting have no affiliation with Gordon. I have bumped into him at Podcast Movement in Nashville in 2021. And that's as far as our affiliation goes with him. He had an email blurb that comes out. I subscribe to it. And there was a story in there about a trademark battle in podcasting. And directly from the email, Rondalyn Korolak, who is a financial coach and author, recently won a legal battle against a Sydney-based social media influencer, Kana Campbell, who is known as Sugar Mama. Just let that sink in for a second. Sugar Mama. Okay. For trademark infringement of the term, quote unquote, financial foreplay. Now, the Federal Circuit and Family Court ruled in Korolak's favor, ordering Campbell to pay nearly $114,000, I assume that's US dollars, in legal fees. Korolak had registered her trademark in prior to Campbell's unauthorized use as the title of her podcast, and Campbell repeatedly ignored Korolak's request that she change the title to avoid confusion. This cause underscores the importance of searching and considering trademark issues when selecting a podcast title, and of registering to protect your distinctive titles and brands against others' use of confusing similar marks. Stephen, did you have a chance to digest this story?
I did, and I'm not surprised to see this because obviously we've got the whole podcast boom, which whether it has declined or not, the reality is when that boom happened, it brought a lot more eyes on the viability of podcasts. And so you even had, big names getting into podcasts and stuff. So I think that in itself would make people legally a little bit more interested in pursuing legal action for podcast related stuff, as opposed to before when it was like almost seen as the equivalent of, oh, that little mom and pop store in the middle of nowhere's land is using the same name that we legally own, but who cares, right? So I think, with the big podcast boom, that makes a difference, but also because, social media influencer, that has also had a massive boom. I think this had all the right writings for legal action.
And we've talked about it before with the FTC and the need to disclose affiliations. First of all, I need to disclose, I should have done this up front, we are not legal experts. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know anything about IP law. If you need legal representation, you should go seek out somebody like Gordon Firemark. So that out of the way, this underscores the fact that hobby podcasters are not immune to legal action regarding copyright or trademark infringement. And as you are setting up your shows, I would agree with Gordon, search for the podcast title in main podcast directories such as Apple Podcasts and Spotify for podcasts, or Spotify, I guess. And then also search for the URL. If you're looking into just different variations of what you want to say, your .com to your .net, your .org, whatever, your .ca in Stephen's case, if you want to search for variations just to make sure you're not stepping on any toes and you won't have to deal with legal ramifications later, go ahead and do that. I would agree. And also just remember, dead shows might not necessarily be free game to assume their name. They might be able to come after you legally and say, oh, no, we are still protective of the name. Just because they haven't produced an episode doesn't mean their IP has gone away. We are not legal experts. Your mileage may vary on any of this in the topic, but make sure you get legal representation. Make sure you search for your show and your URL.
And also be aware of regional laws is my recommendation as well. My non-legal recommendation, because again, we're not lawyers, but I will observe that there are drastic differences between different locations for legalities. So, Gordon Firemark, you might be familiar with U.S. law, maybe not so much with another country. So just keep that in mind.
Yep. Absolutely. So let's move on to another update. We're going to talk Spotify and Spotify for podcasters for a second. So this was an exclusive in Pod News, but I wanted to bring it up because we had just talked about Spotify for podcasters. Before I start, Stephen, did you have a chance to take a look at this?
I did not.
All right.
I'm gonna read. I did, and I found it quite interesting.
Okay. So what we're talking about is a show that was being monetized on Spotify through Spotify for podcasters. And it was removed and deleted, and Spotify was unable to resume the monetization as it was before deletion. Wow. So you had this podcaster, Kagan Carey, and she was celebrating after a couple of years her podcast, Evolving Prisons. It was showing some signs of success. She had a $1.99 payment for extra content going on Spotify. She was given an award, and then 48 hours after she was giving an award for Outstanding Indie Podcast, her show was deleted. So this is a quote from the Pod News email that I received. It has come to our attention that your podcast may contain content that has been flagged for suspicious payments activity, unquote. Within 5 minutes, her podcast was deleted, removed from Spotify, and because the RSS feed disappeared, it began to be removed from other platforms, including Apple Podcasts. We'll talk about that more later. And then here's another quote from the email. Quote, after review, your podcast account has been reinstated. However, based on our internal flags, we recommend updating your password, unquote. So it sounds like there was an account hack involved here, but I think it was more than that. But regardless, every single person that was following her podcast they couldn't just automatically return that. She lost all of her paid subscribers. The system refunded all of the subscribers. She had money sitting in her account for the last 4 months that she hadn't withdrawn. That was apparently gone. All of her stats are gone. And that happens whenever you switch from media host to media host. But in this case, her podcast was deleted, and the system is just not set up to bring them back on Spotify, apparently. And then Spotify was contacted for comment. And they said, quote, we're working closely with the creator to quickly resolve the issue, unquote. And as far as Pod News understood it, following their email to the company, Spotify has been able to restore the stats. So, okay, has emailed her former subscribers. Here's the catch, encouraging them to resubscribe, and has been reimbursed for the lost revenue. So, okay, Spotify stepped up. It might be small, but at least she got it, right? It's a good step, according to Pod News. However, Spotify won't be able to magically get all her followers back from the other podcast apps like Apple Podcasts. Pod News wanted to make sure and underscore this is a rare incident. Mistakes are going to happen. Perhaps if your podcasting has become more serious, it's worth paying for podcast hosting with a smaller company for the personal touch you get, even when things go wrong. That's from Podcast Suggestion. And Kagan agreed, quote, I've lost confidence in them. I will be switching hosting platform, unquote. Interesting.
So I'm going to say that making the assumption, the same assumption that you just commented about the password, that there's probably some form of password compromise. I don't think this is as doomy and gloomy as some of these quotes seem to want to make it on here. There's really one standout aspect that I do take issue with, and that's the fact that in the process that Spotify has set up, there is an immediate termination of things like subscribers and whatnot. It's not, obviously the process is not set to be held right away. And the fact that it's not reinstated afterwards, I think that's the biggest problem there. The immediate termination of the account, the immediate inability to get stats back and stuff, I don't actually have an issue with, because this is the norm on many platforms when an account is compromised. And I will go as far as to say the fact that they were able to get it back is a step above some of these other platforms where people have had this thing happen where their account has been compromised for security reasons, often password related. sometimes due to phishing. Sometimes it takes a long time, if, not ever, to get some of these accounts back. And so the idea that something goes wrong, it's compromised, it's instantly flagged for what I'm going to assume to be legitimate reasons here. If there is a password issue involved, that infers that there was something that happened that started collecting extra payments, that started to use the system for nefarious reasons, probably due to malicious bodies. And that is legitimately a problem for Spotify if her account was compromised. So again, that's making an assumption here. Now, the follow-up is always what I want to see. How do we get things almost back to how they were before? And we've seen this with YouTube. It can be a huge uphill battle trying to get that. I would like to see some form of check in there where maybe things aren't immediately canceled, or there is the most recent X days, the subscribers over the last 7 days were canceled or whatever. Not the whole history, because I think it should be held, maybe manually reviewed. And if they go, yeah, these are going way back, then yeah, there could be some legitimacy there if they go way back. But it doesn't sound like it in this case. So I don't take issue with the fact that the account was instantly held if our assumption is correct that there was a password or security compromise on the account and it was maliciously used, because that is a problem for Spotify, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are facilitating the transactions.
In the end, it sounds like they did the right thing. So I don't know. We'll see if we hear any more about this. I would agree. This is a rare incident that Pod News pointed out. All right, Stephen, we got 2 paths we can go on. We can talk about the elephant not in the room, or you can talk about going behind my back. So which one do you want to do first?
Let's go behind my back, because, that'll give us time to walk around that elephant. So the elephant in the room will come about the Rodecaster Pro. But I want to talk about Video Ninja. So last week I had mentioned that I was doing some experimenting with OBS. And so part of the thing that I was doing with OBS was multi-track audio recording, meaning that in OBS I am getting recorded an individual audio track on my side for everybody who is participating in this current podcast. Last week it was Chris. This week it's just SP. Last week it was Chris and SP. This week it's just SP. And one of the secret things that I did was I wanted to, at the same time, experiment with the communication platform we use, Video Ninja. That's how we use, or what we use every week to communicate back and forth. And so I wanted to give that a try. A feature called Pro Audio. When you go into Video Ninja, there is an option to enable what they call Pro Audio. That's supposed to enhance the audio quality, remove a bunch of settings that can sometimes make the audio all over the place, like auto gain and things like that. And I enabled that. But in order to properly enable it on the Video Ninja side, you actually have to enable it on both the participant and the host side. And so the way that you do it on the participant side is as easy as just tacking on basically to the invite link that you're sending the individual. So last week I did this and I did not tell Chris or SP. I just tacked it on, sent them the link. They clicked the link and off to the races. There they were. So, I did a test. It's in our Discord. I would love everybody to go to our Discord. Go to betterpodcasting.com/Discord, to the Better Podcasting channel, because yesterday on the 12th of March, I posted a bunch of different samples comparing the audio that was recorded on my side, so the stuff that I got through Video Ninja, and their local tracks, the tracks they recorded on their side that they sent to me, and I want people to compare. There is a YouTube link, which I'll put the YouTube link actually in our notes for this episode, but there's also the original MP4. There's also, of this comparison, there's also an MP3 and a WAV file. And I would like people to go and compare back to back and let me know, do you hear much differences? I'm going to wait to comment, but I would like to know what differences you hear, if any, because I have thoughts and they're surprising actually. So I would like to know what other people hear, if they hear anything. So please go to our Discord. And if you want to just go to the YouTube version, which of course YouTube will have which of course YouTube will have re-encoded and all that. I will put that link in there. So it's not the best example, but you can go ahead and see that there or go to our Discord for all of those files. So that's going to be an ongoing experiment over the next few weeks.
I feel a little used. Not gonna lie. Feel used. I feel like I've been cheated on.
You know what? Sometimes you got to get used by me, SP.
It seems like every week. And talking about feeling used, by the way, I had a Rodecaster Pro 2 in the studio.
Yes,
I
that was
bought it.
used. That was used the first time that you got it back
actually-
from RMA.
Yes, it was. Exactly. So in 2022, just to recap, I pre-ordered a Rodecaster Pro 2 in May of 2022. I received it in late June of 2022. By the end of the year, I was having problems with the sound pads. I RMA'd it. They sent me out a new one. It was a good faith show. They actually sent it out to me while I still had the original Rodecaster Pro 2. As soon as I received it, I transferred the show settings and then I sent mine off. And that was it, right? Well, unfortunately, the one that I got back was refurbished. It was obvious when I was looking at the fingerprints underneath the device as we unboxed it live on the show, by the way back then. And I thought, okay, well, we'll see how this works. Initially, it worked fine. Eventually, it started to show problems. The power button was starting to get impossible to work. I was having problems loading a file onto the sound pad, which was different than the sound pad issue I had before where they would just go off for no reason. And I was having problems with it freezing on boot up when it was recording, that sort of thing. So I contacted Rode support again and they sent an RMA for me. So I sent it back. In full disclosure, in the first RMA, they sent out a label for shipping and I shipped it. I didn't have to pay for shipping. This time, for the second RMA, I had to pay for shipping. So I sent it out right at, we got the RMA notification. I got the RMA notification barely an hour before our previous episode, which was recorded last Wednesday. It is again Wednesday. 7 days have passed. So after the show, this was the last show last week that I used the Rodecaster Pro 2 on. I mailed it out. It arrived via the shipping tracking. It arrived at their location on Monday. I have not been contacted by Rode at all since they sent me the RMA. So I don't know exactly what's going on, which is a little small beef I have, but okay. So earlier today, a few hours ago, I got the notification that a UPS package was on its way to me, that it's going to arrive next week because it's being shipped UPS ground, and I have no idea what's in it. I don't know if it's a new unit. I don't know if it's another refurbished unit. I don't know if they're sending other goods and services. I have no idea, but I know something's on its way and I've had no communication from Rode. So I don't know if that's standard or not. I would hope that they would send an email notification or have a dashboard available so I could put in the RMA number and they could inform me what was going on. Like maybe they're shipping the same unit out back and they have done nothing with it. I'd be like, whoa, that would be bad. I don't know. That's the problem. I don't know, Steven. That's kind of bugging me a little bit. And I don't know if that's normal for an RMA or not because I don't usually RMA stuff. I was forced to do it. And then let's talk about my solution to actually work right now. For those that might be audiophiles that happen to be listening to us, because I know there's a few of you out there, you might notice that I don't sound the same. Well, that's because I'm not on the Shure SM7B anymore because I don't have a system that can drive it appropriately. We talked about that the Rodecaster Pro 2 was the only preamp I had available that could drive the microphone with my quiet voice. So I had to take it off the stand and I replaced it with my travel gear that I use when I go to the lake. Basically, I take the Rode Procaster, so it's still Rode, but Rode Procaster microphone instead of the Shure SM7B. And instead of the Rodecaster Pro 2, I have had to put two pieces of gear back in to drive my speaker monitors so I can edit Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. I have the Moto M2 audio interface. Well, I can't record with that. I like backup recordings. We've talked about that before. So I am going straight from the Rode Procaster into the Zoom PodTrack P4. So I've got two pieces of gear. I have none of the DSP, the digital signal processing. So I have no noise gate. I have no bass roll off. I have no mic EQ whatsoever. You might hear my voice a little bit differently. It might be degraded a little bit. You might hear more breaths. You might hear more knocking of the microphone, which I erroneously did when Steven was talking earlier. I don't know if he's going to take that out in post or not. My apologies, Steven. So yeah, that is the solution. So two parts to this update. One, RMA, something's coming back to me. And two, what I'm using in the meantime.
Yeah, in our chat we have, because we do stream this show live on Wednesdays, usually 4:15 p.m. Pacific time, 7:15 p.m. Eastern, and we do have a live chat room while we do that, and there's some people talking about the whole RMA process, and we do have Alaron saying that your RMA experience does not sound like what he would believe to be a normal RMA experience. Normally there would be some communication, and he also predicts it will be a refurb. I would also predict the same given the fact that you had a refurb on your past incident. And I just think that there's not a lot of confidence in their communication. And to be honest, I think if you factor in the history that you've had both times with support, feeling like they're not really listening, they're not really understanding until, you know, they've really pushed through a few emails. I'm not wild about the support that you've experienced, or at least what I've heard through you with the Rode support. Now, in the end, hopefully they're getting you a unit that's all up and going, looks pristine, hopefully, and you'll be back to the races. In the end, I guess that's the net win that you can hope for.
Yeah, I just want something that works. And as we talked before, I would expect something that I purchased in 2022 to last 5 to 7 years. At least 3 years. I know the warranty is 2 years, but I would at least like to get 5 to 7 years. So somewhere between 3 and 7 years.
Yeah.
And I've not gotten 1 year out of either of the units that I've received. We talked about that last week. So yeah, to get something that will last. And unfortunately, my warranty period, which I believe is 2 years, it's coming up in June. So I feel like that's an issue as well, especially when you're dealing with multiple refurbished units. Like, shouldn't the warranty clock start over again? That's just my personal opinion, but that is not the legal opinion for warranties and RMAs and cars and stuff like that. So, okay, I get it, but it just seems like a lot of money to be spending on a piece of gear that is purported to be for people like us, and to have to deal with 2 RMAs in less than 2 years. It's just very frustrating, and the lack of communication. In full disclosure, the first RMA, they were very upfront with us. I was able to ask questions to the actual engineer. I got some information back and forth about the extent of the issue. This time, not so much, not anything. I've had to resort, and this is a third part of the update, I've had to resort to go on social media, places like Reddit, and just ask questions or search and see what other people have experienced out there. I put a post on the Our Podcasting subreddit asking about different people's experiences with their Rode RMAs, if they've had a Rode RMA with either the Rodecaster Pro 2, a Duo, or a Streamer X, because I've seen some stuff online about those 3 things. So if you have an update on your system, you know, get it to us or go to the Our Podcasting subreddit and find my post, because I don't actually post, even though I comment a lot, I don't post a lot. You can go there and you could see the post, and you can add on to it what your experiences are. But yeah, that's the third leg of the whole RMA issue that I've been having with the Rodecaster Pro 2.
You know what? I don't even need to segue it. I gotta write down I got too much going on. Edit, pre-bump, and post-bump. Trying to scroll while I'm switching and making notes. We're back. Oh,
I'm here.
We're back with another segment to do with media hosting. If you didn't gather yet, this is the season 4 theme of Better Podcasting. We're rolling through some different media hosts to be able to hopefully decide where we're going to jump to when we jump away from Libsyn. So this week we've got on deck Simplecast. According to the company's profile, Simplecast was founded back in 2013, but was acquired by SiriusXM-Pandora in June of 2020. What?
Yeah, that's a fact that's going to come back later in our review. But to be clear, neither of us have any firsthand experience with Simplecast before our preparation for this episode. And for this episode, specifically with Simplecast, I have obtained permission for a second canceled audio podcast that ran from 2016 through 2017 that the owner allowed to Podfade. I happen to have the episode. I reached out to the owner of the podcast, got his express permission to use the show in the test. So this is not something that I advocate doing of just taking somebody else's old show and throwing it up there. I got express permission. I actually got screenshots and the whole communication back and forth. But neither of us have even considered using Simplecast until we made plans to check it out for this season of Better Podcasting. And Steven, just want to confirm that is correct, right?
Absolutely.
All right. So now that the foundation is laid for our review, we'll continue our format that we've used for our previous reviews of podcast media host providers and discuss the highlights, the neutral points, and the shortcomings. Now that the foundation is laid for our review, we'll continue our format of discussing the highlights, the neutral points, and the shortcomings of the Simplecast podcast media hosting service from the lens of a hobby podcaster. So we'll start where we always do, which is, does it have the ability to redirect your RSS somewhere else? The simple answer to that is yes, there is a 301 redirect capability. It is down a click from the distribution tab in advanced settings in the dashboard, but it is there and it is simple to use. And with that said, it's just time to move on. Otherwise, this would have been a real short segment. Simplecast provides unlimited audio uploads, asterisks. Talk more about that later. And unlimited downloads at the basic plan level. And the monthly cost is $15 per month. And you can upload as much audio every month that you want to upload, asterisk. You are not limited to a number of total monthly file size or hours uploaded. This means you could do a daily 3 or 4 hour show. And if you wanted to do that, you could do it at $15 a month. That seems like a deal. And for hobby podcasters, this unlimited capability is a positive, not only for a daily show, but also if you have a weekly show like ours on Better Podcasting, and if you have the surge over a certain period of time. It's something that I've done on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. before, where something comes out, we're actually putting out one episode every day for a week for the show, in addition to our normal episodes. It's very similar in concept to Podbean's paid capability that we reviewed a few weeks ago. But here's where the asterisk comes in, Steven. There are episode limits that are forced. And we'll put this into file integrity, but it feels relevant to talk about it up front here. And Steven, you were saying that files above 128 kilobits per second are reduced to 128 kilobits per second.
Yeah, this is something I actually stumbled across while I was searching some of the help documents. It's something I've been trying to do each week is get a feel for the help and some of the information that's on there. And they don't make it clear when you're uploading about these, but when you do go to the section in the help article that talks about whether or not they're going to transcode or re-encode the file, they specifically limit or say that any files that are uploaded above 128 kilobits per second, they're reduced down to 128 kilobits per second. Now, we're going to come back to that a little bit later because we do have something to expand on in that. But that's, according to their policy, one of the limits that they have is above 128 kilobits per second. And then the second limit that does apply is a maximum of a 1 gigabyte file for the audio files that are uploaded. So I don't think that that's out of the realm of what most people would be looking for anyways, but it is technically a limit that is worth putting here when you are using the term unlimited.
A 1 gigabyte audio file at 128 kilobits per second. I can't do that calculation in my head, but that would be huge. I mean, an hour and a half show runs about 90, so 90 kilobits per second. So you're talking about a gig. So you're talking about maybe even a 24-hour type of stream that you could throw up in your feed there. So it is
24-hour episode of Better Podcasting coming soon.
If we move to Simplecast, maybe, but I don't think that's going to happen. Anyway, the ability to upload unlimited would be our average expectation for a modern media host. So our rating for this would be a 3 out of 5, just like Podbean was. We're not going to change for that. Noting that Simplecast does have a few differences from Podbean that we'll get into. And one of them is that Simplecast is $1 more than Podbean, but it's in the same relative class. So we'll just go with that for their affordability rating.
Now, moving on to the website, we're going to throw the website overall into the highlights section. And we're going to say that the Simplecast website, it does look decent, does look presentable, definitely looks better than at least one of the media hosts we've looked at previously. And there's some options in there, like the option to prevent search engines from actually indexing the website if you don't want that. That's something we talked about a long time ago on Better Podcasting. There's also no way, though, to turn off the website that we found, which is probably where this pro comes in because, sorry, don't know where that came from.
Yeah, that was out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Must be spring.
Yep, that is. Which is probably where this pro comes in because you might want to shut off the indexing because you're kind of forced to have a website. There are social media links, though, in there, which is something that we faulted last week for Spotify for podcasters. For here, you can turn on things for Twitter or X, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Patreon, and there is also an other. You're also able to link it in with Google Analytics and also information about distribution sites beyond Apple Podcasts. They are a click down, however, but there technically, even though there's a Pandora link and they're owned by Pandora and they're kind of buried by Apple Podcasts, but the feature's there. So we're going to call that a win.
It's so weird. Now, first of all, Twitter is actually called out in the dashboard. It's not X, but there is other there. So you could put another in there and just call it X if you were an X fan and you're like, I don't want to call it Twitter. I want to call it X. Well, there's some people out there. So maybe, I guess, I don't know. And the whole Pandora thing, I agree. That's very odd that it's a Pandora affiliated company and they're purporting Apple Podcasts. It's weird to me. Anyway, with that said, the website is not anything to write home about. However, it does take minimal effort on the podcaster part, which I'm lazy. So cool. As we've expressed, it feels like it should be in the case of 2024, as many podcasters aren't techie. I am techie. I'm lazy. Just don't want to worry about it. So it's a win, at least for this category for us. Now, moving on to customer service or customer support. I had the wonderful opportunity to use this out of the gate as I was trying to put a new podcaster on here. Now, we'll talk about what happened later, but let's just focus on the customer support right now. It took a few hours and it took a few back and forths to resolve the issue, but responses took about an hour each time and were very pleasant and informative. Also, we've noticed no community issues with Simplecast and their customer support. And basically this meets our criteria of timely. And I've got a question for our audience at this point in time. Our criteria when we first put on there was just timely. Do we need to add knowledgeable or pleasantness to the criteria? Let us know. But for now, we're just going to keep the criteria at timely.
Now, as we were setting up our respective shows on Simplecast, we found that the user interface, the desktop interface, was usable. The days of a very technical interface with coded options like we experienced way back on Libsyn 4 seem to be coming up less and less as we look at some of these shows. There are some few options that were there that needed a couple of clicks, but most of the time it was really easy to see the options that were there, and there were a couple that were missing, but overall really easy to work through and understand what was what. There were step-by-step guides, so as you were setting up a show, it was really easy to understand the different blocks that they needed to have completed and how they applied. And we'll say this, it was easy to understand on the back-end interface, but it's worth note that sometimes certain pages felt a little bit long, almost like they didn't find that balance between making things really easy to understand the individual blocks and also not making it sound daunting. So there were some steps as you were going through that did feel long. And I think a good example of this was when I set up my test show, there were 6 different blocks that were required to fill out in order to set up a show. Yes, definitely easy for someone to read it, understand what they were, but the way that there was multiple pieces of information in each block almost made it feel like I was just going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, wondering, when is this survey going to end? You know that experience, but it wasn't a survey. It was to set up my show. So I think that there are areas where it feels overly complicated, but still understandable and usable for most, but usable probably for most podcasters.
Along these lines, let's talk about the mobile use perspective. And for us, it's a win. There's no dedicated app, but it was very easy to function on a mobile web browser. In fact, at the risk of spoiling a later point, in our opinion, it was better on mobile than on the desktop. After using the dashboard on mobile, it seemed like maybe the design choices were targeted towards mobile instead of a desktop design. The buttons and navigation felt very in line with what you would expect for mobile, but you see it replicated on the desktop as well. Continuing on, let's talk about distributing your RSS feed and what are the directories that it gives you. Actually, this is pretty good. It gives you destinations such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora. Shocking. I'm actually shocked that Pandora was not above Apple Podcasts, but it's there. YouTube was there, so that's a win, especially since you can distribute your audio show with a static image to YouTube these days. We don't recommend that, but it is available for you. Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, which is sunsetting really quick, iHeartRadio, Odyssey, Deezer, Overcast, which I'm scratching my head over. Maybe that's just a link to put in the click that's down from Apple Podcasts on the webpage, because Overcast just takes it. And a bunch of these just take it from Apple Podcasts. Pocket Casts, Player FM, Radio Public, which we've heard is going out of business, but it still seems to be functioning. TuneIn, Ghana, and JioSaavn. Those are the destinations that are included on the dashboard. Again, moving on to the next point, reliability. Neither of us have noted any Simplecast reliability issues over the years. We've known a few folks that have hosted on Simplecast, and they've had no complaints whatsoever, at least none that we've heard of.
Now, moving to the next highlight, it was a surprising win that we came across here, was that there did seem to be some features that were included that targeted more advanced users, even on the basic plan level that we were evaluating for this episode. On the basic plan level, Simplecast will actually allow you to add an additional team member. This basically means that 2 users can have access to the same podcast, which is helpful even for something like SP and I, where we've got 2 producers on this show, and maybe you've got somebody who is posting and someone who's editing. All sorts of options there when you have that. And on the basic plan, that does apply. This leads to another positive, that they had a pretty easy to understand multiple show handling, meaning that I went and I set up my podcast. SP invited me to check out the one that he had. And then all of a sudden at the top, there was a really easy to understand drop down for switching between those different shows. It was really easy to understand. And also, if you have multiple, there's a whole page dedicated to showing all of the different podcasts on your account, that just through some regular hamburger buttons, you just go in and click into the main sections of that specific podcast you want to go to. So the multiple podcast handling was pretty good. Another weird advanced area that we had noticed was they actually have an API use, and they talk about it. So for those of you not familiar, an API is basically the nerdy way that one thing talks to another thing. And they make that clear that there is an API for Simplecast. If you are a techie person that really wants to get into the weeds of things, they provide an API that you can use for that. So kind of neat that they've got that. Obviously not targeted to the more simple user, but hey, if you are getting into the advanced things, I could see that being a make or break for you. And the last advanced feature we wanted to mention along the same lines as the API is there were a couple customizable fields that I hadn't really seen on most other shows or most other media hosts yet, which is, for example, on the individual episode, you can go and set the slug, the URL for each episode. Basically, it gives you a box that it will automatically generate what that URL will be on your site, but you can customize that, which is nice. That's a pretty standard feature on most website things like WordPress, but on MediaHost, I don't always see that. And there's also a promotion link where you can actually share the link going to a specific time code like you see on YouTube. So if you wanted to link to your specific episode at a certain time, you've got that ability to do that. It is through a web player, but I thought that was a nice feature to have because that does come up, and sometimes people have to go and extract a clip or tell someone, hey, go to this time. But having that YouTube style share at was I think a nice thing to have.
We also have two other highlights that aren't part of our criteria, but we're going to talk about them. Simplecast does provide a way to market your show through the AudioGo paid platform to other podcasts, streaming music, and digital radio apps. So you have the ability to try to gain listeners through paid promotion there. And then for their free trial, you don't need to enter a credit card. That's actually a bonus. Do you get to publish? No, they won't give you the ability to gain an RSS or publish until you put a credit card in. I actually think that's a positive, by the way, because then you're not flooding the airwaves with all these free shows that you have one episode out there and there's nothing beyond that. Spotify for Podcaster has this issue for a while, and they've actually cut back on the amount of dead shows like that out there. So I will give Spotify for Podcasters final credit. It took them a few years to do that, but Simplecast is putting that cap on there to begin with. And no, you don't get to publish until you give them some money. It does allow you, though, to explore the site without a credit card. That is a bonus. You can try everything out, see if it works for you or not, see if the options are there that you want. So yes, would it be better to enter a credit card as you're setting up a show? Definitely. It's the only way to get all the features in there to test, but it would also allow you to see enough to determine whether you like it or just feel like you've seen enough to know it's off your list. Whatever you choose.
Now, moving on to the neutral section, this is the things that we're going to say aren't big wins or aren't big shortcomings. We're going to kick it off, talk about the import feature. Yes, it seems to work well, which you would think would make it a plus, because we've talked about the import features being in a plus when they work well. This is where things change, though, because SP ran into an issue with the import process because he had an existing Simplecast creator account. Go ahead and recant that.
To be clear, I wasn't trying to import a podcast. I was trying to set up a new podcast because this second show wasn't available anywhere else that I got permission to use. So I went to make the new podcast. I went into Simplecast, and usually I try to go in and use an email that I haven't used before. I had forgotten that I had a Simplecast Creator Connect account. So I used the normal email that I use for these sorts of things. And I already had an account there. So I'm like, okay, well, let's just try this out. I had no way to get to the podcast dashboard because Simplecast Creators Connect was created also to import your shows into places like Stitcher, which doesn't exist anymore, and Pandora in the destinations. So I already had podcasts such as Better Podcasting, the show right here, Better Podcasting Live Chat, and Better Podcasting Chats with SP on the dashboard. I had no way to import or create a new show. I had to contact their support to enable the podcast dashboard view in Simplecast. Now, once the dashboard was enabled, the import was simple, but the whole process for me took, I can't remember, somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. And that was the back and forth that took about an hour each time just to clarify what was going on. And I also tried to start a new show using a throwaway account, and it worked flawlessly. So I have no issues with starting a show or importing a show on Simplecast. But while we would normally place this capability in the highlight section of non-complications, the fact that I did have complications of an existing account moves it into the neutral section. And of note, Steven didn't run into any issues, just like I didn't run into any issues when I was starting the throwaway account. But I assume that's because of anything I had submitted was done a different way or a different email or something. So, and then Steven the same way is he had submitted shows to the same Simplecast Creator content account, but you didn't run into those issues and you're just assuming you were using a different email, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much my assumption. So your mileage may vary, but hey, if it happened to 1 out of 2 of us, it could happen to you. So we wanted to make sure to mention that in this section.
Now, moving on to the available statistics, they are acceptable with various different information that is presented. However, there is a default unchangeable view of only the previous 5 episodes available. I would like to see more, and even Podbean shows the last 10 episodes in a default view, but even that is limiting. I don't like that at all, and we talked about it in our Podbean review. The views that are available include an overview, the last 5 episodes, as I was just talking about, including the stats, top episodes over time, top listening methods, the time of day they are being downloaded, the location of download, the top countries available. Now, the graphs themselves are of a neutral basis. On one hand, they're easy to understand. On the other hand, they feel pretty cheap. I think that's between both of us, we agree with that. There's something about them that just looks like they had no effort being developed. I mean, it looks like a high schooler put them together, in my opinion. And Steven, you had some specific things to talk about it.
I found them hard to look at just from a visual perspective. The color contrast to me was really weird, especially, when you're trying to zoom in on them. I don't know what it was, but I actually found them hard to stare at. So if you're really trying to delve into these different graphs for a long period, I'm not wild about the color choice that they used. And I think that is a relevant discussion point, because if something is hard to look at, how often are you going to look at it? It might reduce the amount that you use it. So I personally didn't like their visual look either from that perspective.
That would be pretty limiting for podcasters, because we all know podcasters love stats and love to look at them every single day, especially when they start. So yeah, I think that contrast would be weird to deal with on a daily basis. It's also of note that you can get more advanced stats by upgrading your account to a higher level. So while it's possible to get some of the features that we desire, it's not in the level that we're looking at for the average hobby podcaster at $15 a month.
Which I think it's a good point to inject right now. That is the plan we looked at for this specific evaluation, because like we've done with some of the other ones, we're looking at the plan that does seem most likely for a hobby podcaster.
As for monetization, which is one of our criteria, there is no option presented in Simplecast at the $15 a month plan. However, there is the ability to link to Patreon, which is an ability to monetize. There's also dynamic ad insertion available for higher tiered plans. So you can't get it at the basic level plan. You can get it at the professional and enterprise level plans. So while not exactly a highlight, there at least is an option to go to Patreon. And you can pay more to get that dynamic audio insertion. So we'll keep this in the neutral section for now. As far as the company's long-term health, it's in part of the Sirius Pandora family. And we doubt this company will be shut down anytime soon without large public knowledge. But there have been issues with SiriusXM in the past. Additionally, SiriusXM does have a bit of history of making changes with little notice, so we're not going to ignore that. Sometimes it feels like the podcast aspect is still there. Let's see if we can make this work phase. And I want to double tap that on this does not seem to be as integrated into Pandora as Spotify is with Spotify for Podcasters, or before that Anchor.fm. This seems like a weird add-on that they've thrown in there, and they've not managed to integrate it within their company or their streaming. So with that said, we'll keep this in the company health in the neutral section for now, but at any given time, this could go one way or the other with positive or negative earning reports.
We'll put the billing part in the neutral section because they have credit card only. Probably going to appeal to most people, but some don't like credit card. Now, for the social media aspect, we will say that there is those social media buttons that we mentioned about the different badges, but there's no auto posting available. So if you're looking to simplify your automatic posting, that's not happening. And the last neutral that we'll mention in this section is about the actual download process. So if you are looking to download your MP3 file, you can do it. You can go into the individual episode on the back end, and there is a button that says MP3 download, which is cool. So you push the thing that says download your episode audio file. Sounds like things are going well, right? Well, when you do that, it simply just copies the link. It doesn't start the download, even though the text says, quote, download your episode audio file. So then you got to go into a browser and you got to paste it, which is, you know, not the end of the world, but it's a weird inconvenience. Now, if it was just this, we might have debated whether we put this in the highlights or we leave it in the neutral section. But when you go to the actual embed area, if you're embedding this on a website, playing it on the website, or trying to get it through a user interface online, there's no download option even there for the file. So the download option, which is something we've talked about a couple times, if you're wanting to actually download your MP3 itself, which is something we've been looking at, it's too many cons to not put it in the neutral section. It's just really unnecessarily weird to try to hit download. So we're leaving it in the neutrals because you can do it, but not easily.
Let's kick off the shortcomings and give a blanket statement. The interface choices, they simply feel odd. The interface itself feels extremely bare bones, but on the other hand, they have a lot of fields available, which is good. In some areas, they feel like the things are unnecessarily spread out, or maybe that's they don't make the optional fields feel clearly optional. Feels like they went with a minimal design, but a more complex set of inputs.
I'm going to take it a further step because contrary to us having in the positives that it is a usable interface, and we made sure to specify that, I hated the desktop experience. Without question, this is the worst one that I've used so far. I thought it was one of the most unnecessarily ugly interfaces that we have used. And it just feels like someone started a process and didn't finish it. They didn't carry it through. It's a weird interface to me. I didn't like it. And then that mobile interface feeling right, it all started to sort of jive to me. I think maybe it was designed so that the one interface would work on both platforms, but maybe emphasizing that the mobile might be what they were anticipating the trend would be at the time. I don't know that that's the case, but I just hated the desktop experience. I thought that it was unnecessarily bland, unnecessarily or unfinished. I just didn't like it. And even though I commented a couple weeks ago that I thought Pinecast felt very plain, this in itself feels like Pinecast has all sorts of color in their interface because I just didn't like this interface at all. Throw in the graph problem that I had, feeling like I was staring at the sun. Overall, I hate the interface.
Along with the lines of the dashboards, as we mentioned, from a functionality perspective, their multiple show handling was a win. However, it's worth a note that you will have to pay individually for each show, just like Libsyn and Podbean. Also, Simplecast is just a podcast media host providing service. There's no capability to connect with your guests and your co-hosts. There's no ability to record. There's no ability to edit or produce your show. There's no ability to produce shareable promotional material. And moving on from that, other than a transcription field, Simplecast does not appear to support Podcasting 2.0 namespace at this time. And I feel appropriate at this time to say that transcriptions, I don't think equal Podcasting 2.0, but it is part of the Podcasting 2.0 namespace. I think most of the podcast media host providers with the Apple announcement have transitioned to some sort of transcription field or are shortly going to transition to a transcription field support. So I'm not going to include this as part of Podcasting 2.0 as we go forward, but maybe we need a separate field for the transcription support. So Stephen and I will talk about that going forward. The file types supported with Simplecast include MP3 WAV or M4A. There are no video file types supported, which is not surprising because they don't have video that's supported. Simplecast has an automatic publish to YouTube available, but as I mentioned before, it's an audio show with a static logo image. Stephen and I would greatly recommend that you not do that because long term, we just don't see the audio show with a static image doing well in the YouTube platform because they're a visual medium to begin with, and eventually that's going to catch up to the whole thing. Now, maybe we'll be wrong long term, but I don't think so. So even though they have this capability, we recommend that you do something else. Maybe throw a VTuber out there or some sort of animation over your show, not just the static image, if you're going to use the YouTube platform. And that includes YouTube Music. Simplecast does not provide a capability to attach ID3 tags to the audio file. So if you're going to use ID3 tags, you need to tag them before you upload. While Simplecast has the ability to provide a dynamic audio insertion capability at the professional enterprise plan level, as I mentioned before, at the basic plan level, it's not there, so it's in the shortcoming. Simplecast does not provide a way to support memberships or paid subscriptions at the basic plan level. And finally, and I think this is the biggest one out of all of them, out of the entire review, is file integrity. And based on our experience, this feels like a fail for us. I went into the RSS feed and direct downloaded the file that I uploaded. The file had been encoded originally. Again, it's not my file, so I wouldn't do this, but originally it was encoded at 80 kbps. It came back at 128. This is a bad thing? Not really. But what other files do they re-encode, Stephen?
Well, here's the thing. I want to change that because you can omit that, re-say that point because that was before we put that point up top. So.
All right. Do we need to flip? Okay. Re-encode. The file had been re-encoded from 80 kbps to 128. Oh, let me re-say that. I'm sorry. The file had been re-encoded from 80 kilobits per second to 128. Is this a bad thing? Not really, but we know that they re-encode files above 128. Then this becomes a shortcoming for us. Lately, I'll admit, we haven't talked about it on the show. I have been throwing them out at 192 kbps stereo because I have included stereo bumpers in my show. So I want them to be heard as stereo. This is a change from what I've done previously, which was mono at 96. In full disclosure, the rest of the podcast, as people are talking, are mono, but it doesn't render that way. It's all stereo. So I've been at 196 or 192. So theoretically, they would be re-encoded from 192 to 128, and that's a fail for me. This is a downside to have an unlimited plan versus an alternative limited plan based on file size for the company itself. It makes sense that they have a target per file size that they deem acceptable. But if it was a file size limit, then it wouldn't matter what the encoding were, as you just use your allocation a little bit differently, right? So given the real world encoding that we saw, we have to give this capability for Simplecast a fail.
Especially because it happened on something that apparently was below the spec where it was not supposed to happen. So definitely worth concern. In summary, there's just several things that Simplecast seems to do pretty well that would work for some podcasters, but there are some features that might even draw in certain podcasters, like we mentioned, there were some of those team features. That's something that could make or break somebody's decision if they are sharing their podcast with somebody else. So that's not lost on us. However, we're taking it officially off of our short list because there's just a couple things in those cons that just make us uncertain about whether we could take the risk on Simplecast with these problems. For example, the dashboard. I personally don't know that I could look at that each week. I don't like it that much. But putting that aside, the encoding was really the moment that it failed for us and it came off our short list because we have made a huge effort over the years of Better Podcasting to publish our show a certain way. We have done this to specs at that time. SP just mentioned he's now doing things differently for his shows, and there have been times over the course of this show where we have increased the bit rate based off of the standards at that time. But it doesn't matter. Going all the way back to episode 0, we have taken an active effort to encode at something that we set for that time. And if we are to go and upload all of our back catalog to Simplecast, we don't know whether it's going to be re-encoded or not. I believe our entire library should be below that certain spec, but we saw it happen on something that didn't. And so the fact that they acknowledge that they have protocols behind the scene to re-encode, the fact that it's possible that something might be re-encoded that's not, it would possibly destroy our entire effort that we've made over the course of this podcast. We're not willing to import all of our shows over to Simplecast at this time. So that was truly the moment that it really firmly came off of our list of media hosts we're considering.
This is where we here at Better Podcasting turn the show over to you as we run through some of your feedback. We call this segment Better Podback.
All right, let's get the fun feedback out of the way. This is the one all about our guest host last week, Chris Farrell. Over in our Discord server, we did have Chris make a post thanking us for coming on and everything, but the thanks are ours, Chris. But the reason we give you this context is because replying to one of Chris's posts, Josh Liston said, "Was a great episode. You guys have so much time on the mic together, made for a very natural flow. SP and I have done this show for 288 episodes as of last week. We have lots of experience doing this show together." Chris was the one that just slid on in and continued that flow. So the credit truly goes to Chris with this. So Chris deserves all the credit for any flow that you felt last week on this show. So Chris, we acknowledge you are the better podcaster than us.
Absolutely. Also, Damien just said it was weird listening to Better Podcasting, then Gonna Geek back to back, and it was all the same host. So Steven had released the latest Gonna Geek within days of releasing the Better Podcasting. So it was the three of us on both shows, and it was just weird for him to listen to him back to back. And to be honest with you, I enjoyed having Chris on the show, and especially since he had a lot of valuable things to say about the way he did things and what we had reviewed. He stood up to our questions. He avoided a couple of questions that I made, but eventually I was able to corner him and he answered them. And he also asked me a hard-hitting one too. So it was a fun episode for all three of us.
Now, for our next piece of feedback, this one surprised me when I saw this in here. I actually didn't realize this was going on. Apparently, one of us is having problems with some of our gear. People were talking in our Discord about, what is it? A Rodecaster Pro 2. I don't remember this coming up in our podcast before.
Yeah, man, I just got to say that's got to suck for whoever has to deal with it.
Awful, especially if it's their second time. But no, jokes aside, we're trying to add humor to this because you should see some of the messages I've expressed behind the scenes about frustration on SP's behalf. We had some people comment about the Rodecaster Pro 2 issues that SP was having, and there was an interesting question that was brought up by Damien the DM. He said, "I think my question was missed during the live." So he actually asked this question while we were recording last week. He said, "At this point, is a refund an option? Would you take it if they offered one?" And this brought up a whole question about what is comparable to the feature set of the Rodecaster Pro 2.
Yeah, I shot back with, well, first of all, it's well gone past the refund capability, and I didn't even buy it directly from Rode. I got it through Sweetwater. So Sweetwater's not going to give me a refund for it at a year and a half into it, almost 2 years into it. Then it's not going to happen. So if I did get a refund, though, I would need to replace it in my studio. So my question is, what device has the same capabilities and is more reliable? We reviewed the Rodecaster Pro 2, or at least I did review the Rodecaster Pro 2 several times, and the capabilities that really drew me to it, and the first one being the preamps, and that's what kept me off of the Rodecaster Pro original, the Tascam Mixcast 4, and the LiveTrack P8, or the PodTrack P8, and the LiveTrack L8 and L12. There is two things, the Polywave and the preamps. There's other things as well, but I'm like, what are you going to do that's going to get the same capabilities and more reliability? There are other devices out there, but there are not other devices with the same sorts of capabilities. And the capabilities that I like might not necessarily be the capabilities that you need or like in your studio. So maybe one of those other devices will work for you. Or maybe, as Randy Walker pointed out, the Mackie DLZ Creator or the DLZ Creator XS would be good. And Stephen and I have gone back and forth on the Mackies quite a bit recently. We've both been considering what would be good for him, what would be good to replace in my studio, and we both have slightly different viewpoints on it. But from my viewpoint, what the Mackie DLZ Creator brings is a huge footprint that I don't have space on my desk for, so I have to go to something smaller. That leads me to the DLZ Creator XS, which is a smaller footprint, would work here. I actually would enjoy the bigger screen. I don't necessarily need the faders, so the knobs work fine for me. I'm a set it and forget it sort of person. I think I mentioned it on the podcast before, but it is only 2 XLR inputs. Now, reality is that most of the time it's just me in the studio. From time to time, we do a microphone shootout. So most of the time that's just 2 XLR inputs. I have had other people in the studio here before, but really only one other person. But I still have that nagging feeling that sometime Steven is going to show up here. And if Steven shows up here, Chris is going to show up here. And I'm going to have the ability to throw 3 people into the machine. So the Creator XS is a no-go, as is the Duo, basically, is a no-go for me for both of those. I want at least 4 XLR inputs. And if I bring it somewhere, I like the ability for the Rodecaster Pro 2 to be able to add that USB microphone into it. In the second USB-C that comes in, I could do a PodMic USB, and I could add that as a 5th microphone. That's a capability that the Rodecaster Pro 2 has. Since Rode and Mackie are now one company, I have no idea where the future is. If they're going to release a 3rd version of the Rodecaster or a 2nd version of the DLZ Creator, is it going to be a Rode? Is it going to be Mackie? Are they going to maintain both lines? I have no idea. I'm excited to find out, but I get the feeling that I'm going to be disappointed with whatever comes out, because it's not going to be a 1-for-1 replacement for the Rodecaster Pro 2. And as Jason pointed out in our chat earlier on, many people that have the original Rodecaster Pro were holding out for the Rodecaster Pro 2, and we're kind of disappointed with the capabilities of the Rodecaster Pro 2 when it came out, and there was no need for them to change from the Rodecaster Pro to the Rodecaster Pro 2. So I'm kind of thinking it might be the same way between the 2 and the 3. And it's a lot of money to lay out every 3 or so years as they increase the capabilities or renew the capabilities. So basically there's that. Damien the DM in the chat on the Discord did bring up the Creator XS. We had talked about it on the show before, Damien, but he just found out about it as he was Googling, and I won't hold him accountable for that, because I was the same way with the Zoom Essential line. I was like, oh, we just discovered Zoom Essential, but Randy had posted it in our Discord weeks before, so my bad on that. But I think that's where I'm at. I don't have an option really beyond the Rodecaster Pro 2 for what I want. Now, would any of those options that I just said do in my studio? Probably, but it's not preferential. I would like a working Rodecaster Pro 2, and since this is the second RMA, I don't know if I'm going to get it.
On the note of Polywave on the Mackie DLZ, we have been trying to figure this out actually for a little while. We've been looking behind the scene. There's not a lot of documentation, but we did find a Reddit post where somebody had said that they actually sent theirs back because it was Polywave. So that's all we've really got to go on. It does look like it's Polywave. Yeah, we could talk about Polywave in our Discord. But the other thing I want to mention is I personally question how long it will be for the next update on a Rodecaster Pro, because we saw obviously a few year change or a few year gap between the 1 and the 2, 3 year altogether, but that was going from one product to a very different product. And I say that because it operates differently. It's got very different features. It's got better preamps. It's just, you can't look at them and assume they are the same thing. Like, they look so different. But you look at some of the other products that have been created since the Rodecaster Pro 2 came out, even though that was 2 years ago, there's been more recent products that do look very similar to the Rodecaster Pro 2. So it almost feels like the Rodecaster Pro 2 was the gateway into what they want their current line to be. And if that line is still active and they're still building things like the Streamer X and the Duo, when does that next thing come? Especially because they've proven that the Rodecaster Pro 2 is very capable. There's an Ethernet port that has hardly ever been used. So what other features could come? Could we see it being a totally different refresh cycle going to the 3? I personally don't think that the gap between the 1 and the 2 is reflective of what will happen with the 2 and the 3.
All right, we're going to move on to the last bit of feedback that we received, and it was an email directly to me. It was Eric over at Twilight Zone Media, and he took no bones to correct me. He said, in your recent episode, you made a major boo-boo. And, you know, SP is wrong. That's kind of a thing for my podcast. Apple Podcasts does provide word-for-word transcriptions as the episode is playing. What you need to do is click on the little comic strip dialogue balloon at the lower left-hand corner, and he provided a screenshot. After you do that, the podcast transcript will scroll across the show art word for word as it is spoken. Also, in the previous episode about Spotify for podcasts, there's not being able to download files. There's a workaround. Although that works best with iTunes for Windows, get an RSS feed for your Spotify for Podcasters podcast. Subscribe to it in iTunes for Windows or Apple Podcasts on a Mac desktop. Download the episode to your computer. As I said, it's easier with Windows or iTunes for Windows because you can just go into the data folder for iTunes, go to the podcast folder underneath that and find the file. On the Mac, it's hidden under the user library. I would have to get back to my computer at home to locate that. But if you do a Google search for the information about where the Apple Podcasts on a Mac store as it files, you will find it. The further complication is that the podcasts are not stored using any kind of recognizable name. So you'd have to do a bit of digging around to find the file and question it. And to all that, Eric, I have to say, good on you. I did make a boo-boo, but in my defense, again, it wasn't ready. We had this issue with the Patreon app a few months ago. I did not see a clearly delineating ability to do that. And
which I can't believe, by the way, because I thought that iPhones and iOS were the most intuitive thing that has ever been existing, ever.
Well, my sister, who is mentally handicapped with an IQ lower than 20, can operate one. So, you know, maybe, but she has never had an Android. So I don't know if that would apply to Android as well. Anyway, I couldn't find it. I looked around for it a little bit and just didn't see it. I did use it after he pointed it out and I saw it and like, okay, well, if I'm like in a subway, and this is a particular thing that I've actually had happen before, and it was before I got the sound cancellating earbuds, is that if I'm on the subway, it's very noisy. And to be able to have those word transcriptions, I could read that, but on the other hand, so can everybody else around me. So I don't know if I'd use that or not, but that would be a use case if I'm ever in like Washington, D.C. or New York or whatever, and on the subway or the metro in D.C. as it's called. I could see that. And yes, it is there. I don't know if I'll use it on any sort of routine basis because I'm still using Overcast. But if I'm having trouble discerning what a word is, I might go into it. But as we talked about before, the transcript for Better Podcasting could not discern Target. It was Charge. So there's that as well. So I don't know if that would work or not. So anyway, that's the transcripts in Apple Podcasts. I'll say that's a capability that never existed before. I'm glad it's there, especially for accessibility reasons. So good on Apple Podcasts for doing that. And there is a word for word. You can read along as it's playing. As for the download, I will put simply, yes, the capability is there. And actually, the media files that I'm using for both of the shows that I have received express permission to use in these tests have come from my iTunes library. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I always have the twinge that even Apple Podcasts or iTunes will do something to the file as it's being downloaded. And actually, I know that to be true because sometimes the file name is changed and they put dashes instead of spaces in there. That could be a media host issue. It could be an iTunes issue, but it is there. So I want to get the source directly from the podcast media host provider. I don't want, if I'm comparing apples to apples, which is what we are doing here, I want to be able to get that raw file from the podcast media host provider. So thank you very much for stating that. I do know it's a capability that exists, but the reason why I'm not going to use it, and I can't speak for Steven, but the reason why I'm not is I don't trust any other podcatcher not to mess around with the file in a comparison.
The only thing I'll throw in is that the purpose of downloading, like SP said, is to be able to get the file directly and whatnot. And so the idea of using Apple Podcasts is kind of outside of a media host discussion. Yes, it's possible, but also you could go into the RSS feed and just, if you need a single file, and this is how I did it when we looked at Spotify, just went into the RSS feed, grabbed the link for the MP3, posted it into the browser. I also would guess, I don't know this for sure, I would guess there's probably podcast scraper tools out there, maybe for a more advanced user, maybe something that is run in Python or something like that. I don't know. Maybe there's a downloadable program there. You just put an RSS feed and boom, it sucks it all down. There's probably podcatchers out there. Like if I was subscribed on Android on my phone to something, I know those MP3 files most of the time end up in a folder. I could connect to my iPhone or to my Android phone and pull
Let
those
one
from
slip there.
I know, right? Pull those from the file or the folder there. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can suck that file down. But that's kind of outside of what we're looking when we're looking for a download link. We're looking for an easy way for somebody who wants to download their file directly from the media host can do so. And so thank you for that. Definitely a creative way to do that. Do always appreciate the conversation as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. Thank you, Damien. Thank you, Randy. And thank you, Josh, for chiming in this week. We really appreciate it. And thank you all the credit to Chris for being with us last week.
So that's going to go ahead and take us to the end of another show. If you would like to check out the full back catalog of Better Podcasting, if you want, you can call it the Better Ack catalog. I tried to combine Better Podcasting and back catalog. It didn't work. You can go to betterpodcasting.com, find it all there, including the other companion shows. There's the history of the live chat show, as also the Chats with SP show over there. So check that out at betterpodcasting.com. And if you got something you want to say to us, please come to our Discord at betterpodcasting.com/Discord. Also, if you would like to give SP a little bit of sympathy, come over to any of the social media and talk to him about his Rodecaster Pro 2 problems, because I know as much as he's putting on a brave face right now, it's frustrating him and he could use your sympathy.
I could indeed. The shipping information, which could change over time, is pushed into next week because it's being shipped via ground. So yeah, I could commiserate with people. Matter of fact, there might be a Molson or two in my future. But on the positive side, as we were recording this, the Starship IFT-3 is slated to launch tomorrow. So we'll see what kind of big explosion comes from that. Either way, it's going to be a show. I'm excited to see that. And we'll talk about it a little bit next week. And until then, I'll say thank you for stopping by. We appreciate you listening. We really do. we'll see you next week.
So, for episode number 289 of Better Podcasting, I'm Steven saying commiseration. It needs a friend.
MSP saying, again, see you next week. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Better Podcasting. You can find the full back catalog of Better Podcasting at betterpodcasting.com. If you're into geeky podcasts, please check out the other podcasts on the Gonna Geek Network at gonnageeknetwork.com. This show was produced and edited by Stephen Jondrew. Voice work was done by L.W. Salinas. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we hope to see you again next week.
All right, thanks everybody for coming on by. We hope you had yourself a fun time. Come on back on Saturday for Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. There might... No.
Not
oh,
this
right,
week.
You're not here. That's right. You're away.
No, but
Oh.
next a week from Saturday, we'll be talking about X-Men 97, which apparently has blown up in the past day.
There might also be a Gonna Geek show next week, maybe. Maybe not. We'll let you know.
We'll see how many Molsons are involved.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
See you later. Bye.